Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
I'm worried that we are in a state where there are unbelievable things happening in the world, where Trump is destroying the global order. And I also think that Trump is basically on Putin's side in this. I'm afraid we can see consistent policy from
Even
January.
with this action now?
He oscillates back and forth, and there'll be moments where he says in March and July, I'm very angry with Putin and I'm going to do something. And he's now sanctioned 2 major Russian companies. But this is on top of huge amounts of US sanctions, which are already in place. In the end, what I think he hopes is to get a deal which will probably be a pro-Putin deal. It will be a deal that will cede most of eastern Ukraine to Putin and will leave Ukraine in a very vulnerable position and Europe in a very vulnerable position. And I'm worried we're getting a repeat, in a sense, of what he did with Gaza, which is he will declare peace and victory when it isn't really a peace at all. It's him putting a little bit of pressure on a strong man, but in the end, giving the strong man what he wants. Trump is destroying so much of what we've built since the Second World War.
He's still in NATO.
And this is Britain and Europe's
and
opportunity.
He's still supporting with military aid Ukraine.
And we need to dream big about not just Ukraine, but about democracy and international laws and the United Nations. This is our moment.
Welcome back to Whistleblower Wednesday. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, peace is at hand, or is it? Let me repeat what my British deep state operative just said. Trump is destroying the global order. Trump is on Putin's side. Trump wants a deal, a pro-Putin deal, putting Ukraine and Europe in a vulnerable position. He said, I'm worried we'll get a repeat of what he did in Gaza. He'll just declare peace and victory when it really isn't a peace at all. Trump is destroying so much of what we created and built since World War II. All the whining. But President Trump says Putin wants to do business with the U.S. and make Russia prosperous, adding that he expects to end the war within a few months in a very recent interview. I think he sees China's Xi through a similar lens, not exactly, but similar. And that's why he's guarded when he discusses if the U.S. will defend Taiwan if China attacks them. Trump wants to keep the peaceful pathway open in our relationship with China. It's obvious. President Trump has proven that tariff leverage can be used to stop or prevent wars, too. It can bring jobs and investment back to the U.S., and most importantly, open overseas markets and increase manufacturing here at home. Supreme Court's having a hearing about tariffs right now. Well, my guest today to discuss all this is National Security Strategist David Pine. David is a former U.S. Army Combat Arms and Headquarters Staff Officer. He oversaw armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas. He currently serves as president of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. David, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
Hey, Rob. Great to be with you today.
Well, I have to lead with this because of the news from last night. Just this real quick question. I don't want to get too far off subject, but it actually relates. Are they wringing hands in your part of the country about the communist, Marxist jihadist being elected mayor of New York City last night, like I'm seeing around other parts of the country?
I haven't talked to a lot of my conservative friends about that, but those were just stunning results. As we've discussed in a different forum, a Muslim lieutenant governor who speaks Arab and it just acts more like a a non-citizen, perhaps a Islamist supporter. We saw, obviously, Kami Mandani, who's elected, his mayor-elect of New York City, our largest, our largest city in the country. This is a seminal moment and kind of a major red flag for potential Republican loss of the 2026 midterm elections.
Yeah, I'm not so sure it's that because the blue state governors races, I mean, they were long shots anyway. I went up to New Jersey. I knew it was a long shot. So did everybody else that was stumping up there over the last few days. But, we put the work in, and obviously the strategy could be better because not enough Trump voters showed up. You can see by the counties in New Jersey especially. But the Muslim lieutenant governor in Virginia, that one caught me by surprise. I was I was not aware that we had a hijab wearing, Arabic speaking, Muslim momentum woman that was about to be elected. It's amazing what's happening in this country. It just shows that we've got to work harder, and we have to address these things because these are threats to our internal security, David. They really are threats to our internal security. And the threat is even greater than the average citizen believes. I can guarantee it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I wouldn't even describe the Muslim threat as the greatest internal security threat. As you stated multiple times in your show, we have potentially 100,000 military-age Chinese men in our country that were admitted by the Biden administration in I think the final year or two of the Trump administration, but really during the Biden administration. And that's enough manpower. If they were all PLA special forces and airborne troops and PLA army troops, that's enough manpower to man two entire PLA group armies right here in our country. And to my knowledge, President Trump hasn't taken any decisive action on that front, even though he's done an outstanding job on border security overall, and no more Chinese men have crossed on his watch.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but hopefully it was part of the discussions with President Xi when he met with him in private. I'd like to see the reporting on that when it eventually becomes available to see if that was part of the discussions, because it needs to happen. It's got to happen one way or the other. We've got to address those threats because that's what they are, threats. Speaking of threats, though, this Russia-Ukraine war, I came across the guy, he's Rory. He's known as a deep state guy from the UK. That little clip there. Describe what you and I have been talking about, both on and offline. But you've written some great articles about this, the way the president is dealing with Russia and Ukraine, at least over the last 3 months, is kind of some people see it as, I'm not sure, I'm trying to find the word for it. It's not flip-flopping, but just split personality.
Yeah, bipolar. I describe it as bipolar.
Yeah, split personality. And I think I understand where he's coming from, is he's trying to apply the art of the deal to both of the leaders on both sides of this Russia-Ukraine thing, which is both simplistic, the war itself is, but very complex because we've made it so, really.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think Trump has been more of a status quo president on Ukraine. Certainly, monumental change in terms of talking to the Russians and meeting with Putin. That's a huge change. Biden met with Putin once. I think it was in June of 2021, and then he, decided to give him the finger essentially after he invaded Russia and said, "We can't talk to the Russians. We don't, There's nothing to talk about. Ending a war in Europe that could go nuclear, that's not something that's worth talking about with the president of the mightiest nuclear superpower on the planet." So Trump's done a very outstanding job in terms of diplomacy. We've had all those trips with Steve Witkoff. They negotiated a tentative peace deal at the Anchorage summit. But then President Trump, he has these brilliant plans, and I've written extensively. He has a brilliant plan to divide the Sino-Russian alliance and maybe have some kind of geostrategic partnership with Russia that's based on economic terms, maybe get Russia and India to lead BRICS. So he has all these grand plans. His overall grand strategy is really stellar, but his follow through, it leaves much to be desired, and it makes him look more like a neocon when it comes to the war in Ukraine, with escalations of 3,550 ERAM missiles, which are a much greater escalation than we ever saw from Joe Biden. But probably the biggest example was when he met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House on October 17th, and reportedly, told him, "Hey, the Russians have a very reasonable peace offer on the table. It's a good deal for Ukraine. You're losing this war. This is your last chance. Ukraine and maybe you yourself are going to be destroyed." Reportedly he got. He was very animated. He threw the maps on the floor that Zelensky had brought with him to show him how important the Donbass region is to Ukraine. And he said, "You need to see the Donbass region. We can get this signed, within days or weeks, and end the conflict." And he had amazing courage. He stood up for America, and then he left the press conference and said, "I'm capitulating to Zelensky's terms. He rejected my demands. EU leaders are pressuring me to." That's not what he said, but essentially that was the end result. Is he refuses to pressure Zelensky where it matters in terms of cutting off Ukrainian aid or intelligence that would provide real pressure to the main obstacle to peace in this war.
Yeah, it seems kind of unusual, because from what I know, when the president is, behaves one way in a meeting and has obviously a focused approach, an set of objectives, he sticks with them. What do you think's driving this?
Well, I wrote an article back in November when he picked Rubio as Secretary of State, and of course, Kellogg is his Russia-Ukraine special envoy, and also Ratcliffe and other Waltz, of course, all of these neocon dead enders that have been pushing him, especially Rubio. Rubio has really come out. Rubio was reportedly, I think it was in the Financial Times, they said that it was Rubio, the Deep Six, the Budapest summit, that convinced Trump to ditch it and ditch all peace efforts with Russia and use this maximum pressure campaign with the sanctions on Russian oil giants and greater arms shipments to try to quote unquote bring Putin to the table, when we know that Putin's been sitting at the table and has had an offer in hand that Trump privately, this is multiple source, thinks is reasonable and is good for Ukraine and good for America. But he doesn't want to be seen as appeasing Russia, I guess. And so he's afraid of, if he pressures Zelensky into accepting the terms by cutting off arms shipments long term, I think he's afraid of being accused as being weak.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, I'm glad I opened with the election last night, because really, a lot of people are saying, hey, we like what the president's trying to do on foreign policy and everything, but his administration has been almost entirely focused on foreign policy. Even the immigration effort is in part based on foreign policy. And while price of gas is pretty low right now, other prices have not really been coming down. And they'd like to see him focus more on the domestic side of this. But I think this Russia-Ukraine war is such an important issue. He's right. He has to put his focus on this.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, like I said, he has these great plans. He has this tremendous good sense that's just Reaganite. He senses that he can make peace with the Russians, maybe with the Chinese over Taiwan. One of the things that maybe we can talk about later in the program is that China had these three massive air naval blockade exercises during the Biden administration. But since Trump came to power, They haven't had any, and the reason is they had all those reactions to statements by Taiwanese President William Lai, and Trump, for whatever reason, President Lai hasn't made those kind of inflammatory statements to China, and I think I credit Trump for doing that. So he's very sensible. He's innately a foreign policy realist, but he's surrounded himself by all these really bad advisors that are telling him to go in the opposite direction and be George H.W. or George W. Bush the second.
Yeah, I hope not. That's not what I voted for, and I still have confidence in him that he's not going to go that far. We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll see a little clip of him in the 60 Minutes interview talking about Putin and business. We'll be right back with David Pine.
It is working with Putin, I think. I did different with him because we don't do very much business with Russia, for one thing. He's not like somebody that buys a lot from us because of foolishness. And I think he'd like to be. I think he wants to come in and he wants to trade with us and he wants to make a lot of money for Russia. And I think that's great. That's what I like.
Can you get it done in a couple of months, do you think?
I think we're going to get it done, yeah. I think he really wants to do business with the U.S. But it did work with India and it did work with Pakistan and it did work with 60% of those countries.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Is peace at hand or not? That's the big question. The president's been very successful with all these peace deals and those kind of things, even as, kind of bumpy they are in their execution. He's still, all the hostages that were living are back out of the hands of the Hamas Nazis. Many of I think all but about 7 of those that unfortunately are deceased are back. The latest one was a young Israeli American man, and so there have been some huge successes, many huge successes, and then the ongoing concern with the Israeli and Hamas peace deal is always it's going to be out there for a while, but it is moving forward slowly. But the Ukraine-Russia war really is a challenge. And the president's even admitted that a couple of times in live interviews. That interview was just on 60 Minutes, so days ago. And I like what I'm hearing because it's what my guest today and I have been talking about for some years now about the approach to this that we hope President Trump takes. And that is giving Putin something to embrace that's a positive, like in helping his economy, increasing, their prices, increasing prosperity for the average Russian citizen, those kinds of things. And that opportunity to do that, I think, is something that I have thought for some time, and obviously the president does too, that Vladimir Putin and those that are leading the country of Russia really desire it. And that's a potential negotiating opportunity and opening to get these two sides to stop killing each other. David, welcome back. That's just days ago. And we've seen all this back and forth between Zelensky and Putin. And then you mentioned that Rubio's the one that got him to cancel the Budapest summit. Well, if he's still talking that way, that's what I thought the Budapest summit was going to be all about. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, the Budapest summit could have been the signing ceremony for the grand deal that President Trump negotiated with Putin, largely at the Anchorage summit. And Trump even told Zelensky, we had this deal at the Anchorage summit. We got along well. He made some major concessions. He gave up 2/3 of his territorial demands against Ukraine, asking only for another 1% of Ukraine's territory, which would bring Russian control of Ukrainian territory from 19 to 20%, giving up his demands for another, I think, 2% of territory in Zaporozhye and Kherson Oblast, being willing to offer, return all the territory from 3 additional oblasts, where Russians have about 400 kilometers or so, or maybe 500 kilometers of territory. But he really tried to drive home that Ukraine's losing. I mean, Pokrovsk, the fortress city, is essentially surrounded by the Russians, along with other areas, other Ukrainian pockets where the Ukrainian army is at risk of losing another 11,000 troops surrounded. At this rate, the Ukrainian army is losing an estimated 15,000 net troops a month. And in terms, when you consider permanent losses, severely injured, killed in action, desertions, minus recruitment, it's about 15,000. And so essentially, Ukraine is already outnumbered 3-1, according to Ukraine's armed forces commander, General Syrskyi. And they will literally run out of troops at this rate by late summer or early fall next year. And one British commentator recently stated that they're not likely to last until spring, and that may be accurate. But, President Trump, the more he pursues this neocon policy against Russia by escalating Biden's war in Ukraine, the more he pushes peace out of reach. And the Russians certainly see that Trump appears to be giving up on peace right now, and that's very unfortunate.
Has he actually pulled the trigger on the bigger sanctions yet, the maximum effort sanctions yet, though? I mean, I haven't seen anything that confirms that.
No, just targeted sanctions right now. It looks like, Lindsey Graham's, stupid U.S. economy destroying Russia's secondary sanctions bill is stalled in the Senate. Not stalled. It has 85 supporters and sponsors, including himself. 85 idiots in the Senate, 15 America First conservative Republicans. It's a foolish policy. I think Trump is wise enough to understand that those kind of sanctions are going to be very counterproductive. Although he has targeted India, and India has been pushed farther into the Sino-Russian alliance with meetings not only with Putin but with Xi himself at the SCO meeting that they perhaps might have skipped. Actually, I think it was separate from the SCO meeting. So that is, moving when you're uniting our enemies. I mean, that goes exactly against Sun Tzu's principle in The Art of War. We want to be weakening our enemy alliances, and Trump wants to do that, but he seems just clueless on how to accomplish that, unfortunately.
So do you think that it is it's a personnel issue for him? Because, I mean, I'm seeing what you're seeing is that the grand strategy is really exceptional, to be honest with you. Across the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic pillars, but I just don't see the execution piece of it at the level that the president wants it to happen. Or is that what you're seeing?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And there's some irony because J.D. Vance, of course, he was Trump's best decision, his best pick. He's going to be a great America First conservative president. I think he's even stronger than Trump on those terms. He was the leader of the anti-Ukraine war opposition in the U.S. Senate before he was nominated and elected as vice president. And yet, if we'd had a switch, if Rubio had been VP and Vance had been put in charge of foreign policy, I think a lot of these unforced errors wouldn't be happening. We have Marco Rubio that's not only Secretary of State, but he's in a Kissingerian role where he's also serving as interim national security advisor, not merely for days or weeks, but for months and maybe years. Trump initially stated it would be 6 months. Those 6 months have passed. But I've seen no reports that he's planning on nominating a national security advisor. And what I've heard behind the scenes is that Rubio has focused more on his national security job than even his Secretary of State, because you can't do both effectively. Those are both full-time jobs. The national security advisor's job is to coordinate national security policy and strategy. And he's really driven Trump in the wrong direction, as we've seen with the cancellation of the Budapest summit and various other actions.
Yeah, I mean, I've been concerned the last 10 years about seeing the State Department, especially in the Biden administration, seemingly leading military operations and being the lead agent for that. And that's not their function. Number one, I mean, obviously they're the foreign policy arm, but to actually take the lead role in national security and military operations really seems antithetical to me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not their function, but because Rubio is dual-hatted, it's become increasingly that way, and they've returned to I guess a Department of State type dominance, at least in terms of the Secretary of State, with our national security policy and execution. So that's definitely a course correction that I'd love to see resolved.
So I think the president, this is my guess, my hope is that the president's going to take the reins on this even more. And I don't see him removing Rubio or even Keith Kellogg, but I do see him getting fed up with this crap and pulling the reins on those guys and just starting to do the tactical job myself. So if he's really talking about this Putin discussion on manufacturing, economics, not necessarily manufacturing, but their economic carrots, what would those look like if he does get in a room with Putin and Putin wants to do business with us? He said, what does it look like from the American side? What the president would propose to?
Well, it's really interesting because, as we discussed earlier in the program, Witkoff went to Moscow in early August, and they had this new approach that the Russians had proposed, and the U.S. responded very favorably to that July Russian approach with this idea that we would have a ceasefire conditioned upon the return of Donbass from Ukraine to Russia, and the Russians. Putin came and essentially accepted the U.S. offer at Anchorage. And so basically there was a deal ready to be signed. But he not only did that, he brought numerous Russian business executives, energy and economic leaders, and there was supposed to be a luncheon to follow the meeting between Putin and Trump. And that meeting, by the way, was supposed to be one-on-one. The initial meeting was supposed to be one-on-one, and Rubio wormed his way into it, I think, fearing that Trump would sign the deal with Putin, in all but formal signature without Rubio's influence. And so I think Rubio killed the deal in Anchorage as well. But after Rubio kind of whispered in Trump's ear that we shouldn't allow the Russians to accept the very deal that we offered the week prior in terms of the returning the Donbass region. Putin proceeded to give a long history lecture on the importance of the Donbass to Russia, and Trump kind of tuned out, and he decided to cancel the afternoon meeting. He canceled the lunch meeting, and so those Russian economic contacts, which were were, I think, there to discuss exactly what you just talked about, rare earth minerals deals, energy deals, lucrative oil deals that could have perhaps increased the U.S. economic growth in the next year or two by as much as 1 percentage point, got left out of the discussion. And so that, I think, is, just what I mentioned is taking Russia out of essentially not, neutralizing the Sino-Russian military alliance, but also getting them disengaged from China more economically. If the U.S. were to have more, U.S. investment and technology sharing in the Russian Federation, and these kind of lucrative energy and infrastructure deals and rare earth mineral deals that would actually increase U.S. security and kind of break our dependence from China, that's what needs to happen. And but it's never going to happen unless Trump has the courage of his convictions to pressure Zelensky to make peace with Russia. And at this point, he's he's been unsuccessful in getting Zelensky to make even the most minimal concessions to peace with Russia, unfortunately.
Yeah, in this war, we got to take a break again. When we come back, we'll shift over to the Sino-Russian relationship, the relationship between the U.S. and China. See a clip on the president on Taiwan. I think from the 60 Minutes interview is where I believe that's from. But my guess is David Pine, and that's right. It's going to get very complicated, and this includes the Asia-Pacific area and the Indo-Pacific area. It's very complex. This Ukraine-Russia war continues to be a sore that's potentially going to get infected. We'll be right back.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
Would you order U.S. forces to defend Taiwan?
You'll find out if it happens. And he understands the answer to that.
Why not say
This
it?
never even came up yesterday as a subject. He never brought it up. People were a little surprised at that. He never brought it up because he understands it, and he understands it very well.
Do you mind if I ask, when you say he understands, why not communicate that publicly to the rest of us? What does he
Because
understand?
I don't want to give away. I can't give away my secrets. I don't want to be one of these guys that tells you exactly what's going to happen if something happens. The other side knows, but I'm not somebody that tells you everything because you're asking me a question. But they understand what's going to happen, and he has openly said, and his people have openly said at meetings, we would never do anything while President Trump is president because they know the consequences.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Is peace at hand, or is it? That's the big question, I think. And the President Trump's had huge success, 8 peace deals in this short presidency so far. And I think he's going to achieve more. I think the big question is how long will it take and in what form it will look like. And that was my guess is David Pine today. And David, that's from that 60 Minutes interview again. The good news is, the president's a very smart guy, and he obviously learned from his first administration and said, no, I'm not going to openly tell you and him what I'm going to do if it comes to Taiwan. That's the right approach, I think, from a public perspective. And then, do your harder stuff more in private. But the question is, and you mentioned the Sino-Russian relationship more than once in this show, and I think, and there's a reason why it's critically important. And it's directly connected to the Russia-Ukraine war and the outcome of that war and how long it takes. Because the longer it takes, the risk increases that something worse can happen that will involve China, doesn't it?
I feel like the predictions of China making a move on Taiwan in terms of a blockade and/or full-scale amphibious invasion by 2027 are frighteningly accurate. I've actually been predicting it before then, but I've come to believe that Xi Jinping is likely patient enough that he will wait till 2027 or next year at the earliest. So that there is a timetable, and this is really the greatest nuclear powder cake or potential flashpoint we're facing right now, even more than Russia and Ukraine, which because Russia is winning. And Russian victory is inevitable. I think, there is a good chance we can avoid a full-scale war with Russia over Ukraine, even if Trump follows through with those ERAM missile shipments, which would be fired, according to General Keane, by USAF retired combat pilots, F-16 pilots, who are flying all of Ukraine's F-16s and likely being killed in action. as they have been over the last months or longer. And the U.S. just even we're not being told about U.S. military veterans and officer advisors that are being killed by the Russians in Ukraine. But I think President Trump, as you mentioned, does have good instincts on China, Taiwan as well. We know that John Bolton said that there's essentially no way we could possibly win a war with China over Taiwan, because Taiwan, in his words, is 100 times closer to China's mainland than it is the U.S. It's actually about 81 times, but pretty close nonetheless. And they just have all these massive advantages over us in terms of regional military power and almost the regional nuclear supremacy over us as well, because we don't have any nukes. It used to be in the good old days during Vietnam, we had nukes deployed in Taiwan. Now we have 400 or 500 troops, special forces in Taiwan, but that's not going to stop a Chinese amphibious juggernaut with all the firepower they have there. We have no nuclear weapons stationed in the region in terms of non-strategic nukes whatsoever.
Yeah, it's and we've seen this past year before the Biden administration changed, we saw the Chinese and Russian strategic air forces bombers flying together in joint formations, which and probing the air defense identification zone in Alaska and those kind of things. Once again, we'd never seen that before. So the longer this Ukraine-Russia thing continues to go, and the United States isn't able to get its embrace of economic friendship back around Russia, the higher the risk is that we could get into a full-blown situation, and Russia even be involved. And I mean, they outnumber us at least 2.5 to 1 nuclear weapons wise, if both countries are aligned against us in a shooting war, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We've never faced an existential threat this great. I mean, during World War II, we were essentially shielded by the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans and our, the mightiest Navy the world has ever seen from, German or Japanese attack. But today, without missile defenses, this recent movie on Netflix, A House of Dynamite, really demonstrated conclusively. Of course, there were a few inaccuracies, but it demonstrated that it's possible that even if North Korea shot a single missile at us, we might not be able to stop it, and we could lose 1 million lives in Chicago or another U.S. major city because we only have 44, global or ground-based interceptors at Fort Greely, Alaska. That's optimized against a North Korean attack, and likely can only shoot down about 11 missiles or warheads. And Russia and China have much, even more advanced missile defense interceptors in the thousands. Both Russia and China, I think, have thousands of missile defense interceptors as part of their national missile defense system. And we know that President Trump has this, awesome plan to build our own comprehensive missile defense system with a Golden Dome no later than 2028. I don't think that timeline's realistic, but and I think it's underfunded, but I certainly appreciate the president's efforts to defend the U.S. from missile attack. I think really for the first time since the Ford administration.
Yeah, and David, the only way for us to address our ills in supply and logistics is to increase manufacturing capability right here at home. We just do not have the sea lift capable to dominate the Indo-Pacific region like we did during the World War II against Japan, do we?
We don't. The U.S. Navy was 8,000 ships strong. We had, the largest Navy, the largest merchant marine. We had 150 aircraft carriers. Today we have 11 aircraft carriers, maybe 275, ships in the fleet. But we're outnumbered in terms of merchant marine by 63 to 1. China has 63 times more merchant ships than we do, and their supply lines would be far less, 81 times shorter supply lines if you measure the distance between San Diego and Taiwan versus Fujian province and Taiwan. So there's so many reasons why a U.S. victory against China in Taiwan would be impossible, and we would likely come under a massive cyber and counter space attack on day one of major combat operations that would essentially take out the U.S. and break us apart and have our government collapse. So I think Trump does, he did campaign 53 times. He said he was campaigning to save America from World War III. He was very sincere about that. That was in reference, of course, to the Russia-Ukraine war that Biden started, and Trump has decided to continue and escalate. But he has those same views about China. I think he doesn't view, he views Taiwan as very important. He wants to see it independent. He certainly has made efforts to do that, but I think he's continued to suspend, weapons deliveries to Taiwan. Those weapons deliveries have been stalled almost for a decade between Obama, Trump, and Biden, and I think that's kind of a peace overture to China, which Xi may appreciate, and it's those kind of measures, unfortunately, that are our greatest chance of averting a military catastrophe with Taiwan, because a lot of people say that we can't allow Taiwan to fall because if that were to happen, then our alliances would be in question. But in my view, if we went to war with China over Taiwan, the first countries to fall would be our frontline ally states in Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and perhaps others. And those would essentially, I've heard that Russia actually has joint invasion plans with China for Japan, Alaska, and Hawaii. So do I think those plans would be operationalized in the event of war? I think that they probably wouldn't. But certainly if China were to destroy the U.S. with a cyber or a super EMP attack, I think the Russians would take back Alaska and not really have to worry about us anymore.
You mean they would break the sale? Because we bought Alaska from them, didn't they? Didn't we? But I see your point. Yeah, I'm just being facetious there. But bringing the picture, focusing this picture a little bit when discussing a U.S.-China war, we continue, as you mentioned in the first segment, with this maximum effort sanctions deal, pushing on India, and continuing to let this Ukraine-Russia war fester like it is. If something were to happen and the Chinese were to do that and we respond over Taiwan, China's overland resupply routes are already built in because they've got these great relations with India and Russia, right?
Yeah, their relations with India are certainly mixed. Definitely improved. They did have they had kind of border clashes as recently, I think, as 2019 or 20, but they did have, I think, a border agreement in around 2020 to have a long-term truce, and I think they feel that's very important. They want to resolve the Taiwan issue first. They could certainly go back and have future border aggressions against India, but they really don't have any real motivations to do that because there's not that much territorial dispute, and Taiwan is much more critical to them to even than Mongolia, which would be an easy win for them. They could have some kind of stealth takeover in Mongolia and increase their territory by, I think, 1.5 million miles. And I do think that they're going to do that eventually. But the reality is that until President Trump began his tariff war, their plan was winning. Their plan is primarily economic takeover of the world rather than military takeover. And they just have their military, increasingly superior conventional and nuclear forces over the U.S. as kind of a backup, trying to supplant the U.S. in the role of the world's perceived largest regional superpower.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and we're going to talk about the tariff operation in the next segment because they're all interwoven, and maybe we'll even I want to get your thoughts on this. On the Western Hemisphere, strengthening of Western Hemisphere defense, which I think is the right thing to do from a strategic level. I think some of the tactics are, I'm not nervous about them, but I think we need to be very cognizant of the tactics we're using to do that and make sure that there's two reasons. One is political. The other is from a national security perspective, and make sure we're focused on the Monroe Doctrine, keeping China and Russia and Iran, especially, from gaining any more power and actually reducing any power they have in the Western Hemisphere. We'll be right back with David Pine.
We have a big announcement, folks. It's called Bella Melt. In the first week, you lost 3 pounds on this, right?
That is correct.
Your GLP-1 is a natural hormone that's in every single one of our bodies. And your GLP-1 lets you know if you're full. It's a satiety hormone. So when your GLP is working properly, it does help suppress your appetite as well as reduce those cravings. So what it's going to do best is it's going to reduce your sugar cravings or any other cravings you have in your body. It's going to suppress that appetite. But where Melissa got the most benefit, I think, over the last week was the L-carnitine. The L-carnitine tells your mitochondria, this is where you make, we talked about it before, this is where you produce energy in your cells. It actually tells those mitochondria to burn fat for fuel.
MelissaHouseBG.com just now introducing for the first time Bella Melt with GLP-1 fast action.
How do you game up Tuesday's or Wednesday's argument?
I'm quite optimistic, and Shannon, what I can tell you is that because of what the Chinese did on October 8th, threatening to put export controls on any rare earth products that they produce that had 0.01% of rare earths produced in China, that they were going to try to control those, and the president was able to push back using his IEEPA powers. If that's not use of an emergency power, at an emergency time, I don't know what is. And then we go back to the spring, this terrible fentanyl crisis. It's an emergency for what's going on, and we got a solution. The Chinese, thanks to the tariffs, came to the table. So I think just those two alone have shown us that the president has used it responsibly. And then on the third part, with the reciprocal tariffs, there's something called a tipping point, and these trade deficits that we've had for years, 20, 30 years, especially since the China shock in the early 2000s, we were close to a breaking point, and the president did not want us to get there. Imagine if someone had held their hand up in 2006, 2007 and said, we're on the verge of a housing crisis. Well, President Trump raised his hand and said, we are on the verge of a balance of payments crisis, a trade crisis, and I'm going to use IEEPA. That is what emergency powers are for.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Is peace at hand or not? That's the big question today on Whistleblower Wednesday here on Worldview Tube. And my guest is national security expert, strategist, weapons control expert, David Pine. And David, you've been very positive on the tariff operation. So have I. I think it's working. You mentioned them about the Chinese reacting in a way that's positive for our objectives and goals in the last segment. What are things that the American people need to know about this tariff operation vis-a-vis keeping them safe that they probably don't know at this point?
Well, I think that, the U.S. public was brainwashed, during the globalist years in the immediate post-Cold War aftermath. We were told by the Republicans, the neocons, the free traders, the globalists, they all said that if we just built up China into the greatest economic power on par with us, that they would mellow. They would just become they wouldn't become communist anymore. Reagan, of course, said China was so-called communist. Appearing not to realize that China was the most genocidal communist regime on the planet, because he agreed with the plan to get Chinese to be military allies with the U.S. against the Soviet Union, which of course was a dream that could never be realized. But China is it's an enemy of the U.S. But I've always said that instead of trying to have a military confrontation with the U.S., we should focus on a trade war. And I think the Chinese respect us. They have us, really in a bad situation with in terms of 80% of the rare earths, and really just I think there was I worked for Vivek Ramaswamy as his defense and foreign policy advisor, and he gave a speech in which he said that there was 33 critical components in our advanced weapon systems, and he said that over 20 of those were sourced from China. And some of those were irreplaceably sourced. There wasn't a second source that we could go to. So when we have Chinese components in our key weapon systems, and one of my colleagues, a former DHS official, has stated that China has, we have Chinese motherboards in many, if not most, of our weapon systems that could be turned against us, either shut off or potentially even used, to hit, our own troops. We have just an innumerable number of vulnerabilities, secret weapons essentially that China has that Hitler only dreamed of, that could be used against us in war to defeat us in the first few days of a conflict. And but these tariffs, tariffs have been they were Republican, conservative, part of the platform, I think, until the 1976. The 1976 Republican platform had tariffs, and we're talking moderate revenue-based tariffs. They raised money for the U.S. They helped keep wealth, and as you mentioned, mainly our defense manufacturing-based jobs here in the U.S. And according to my calculations, China's manufacturing base in purchase power parity terms is 3.8 times larger than the U.S. So. And in terms of actual defense manufacturing, I think it's probably 5 to 6 times greater. And of course, we know that from the top secret intel report that China has the ability to produce ships 232 times faster than us. So essentially, if we were to fight that because of this defense manufacturing disadvantage, we were to go to war against China and fight a purely conventional war, they would essentially be playing the part of the U.S. and we would be playing the part of Imperial Japan. And they would simply outbuild us and produce a massive fleet and a massive missile, conventional missile systems to completely overrun the Pacific and just sweep across the Pacific and then decide whether to nuke us once they got to the California coast.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I brought up the overland resupply routes from Russia, especially in that relationship and the strategic objective of President Trump in the United States. Being the intent to put pressure on that relationship and create a fracture in it and bring Russia back towards the West and the United States from an economic perspective. That's exactly why. I mean, the Chinese can build something like 1,740 sea lift ships to R5 in a year. That's the difference that you're talking about, where they're like the U.S. was at the beginning of World War II, and we're like the Imperial Japanese were. It's just something that we have to address, and I think that's why the increasing our Western Hemisphere strength and security it weighs in with that and overlays over our need to reestablish ourselves as a manufacturing powerhouse. Not necessarily defense industry, but all industry. It was industry outside of the defense industry, like Ford Motor Company and those kind of industries that were available to be able to energize and do national security work immediately, that enabled our capabilities to build fast enough to be able to win World War II.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If we hadn't had this policy, this America Last policy of unilateral free trade over the last 35 years until Trump came back to office, we would still be a mighty, defense industrial power, and we would be, our defense industrial base might be 2 to 3 times larger, and we could effectively counter China, and we wouldn't have to worry about being conventionally overwhelmed to the degree we're facing today. And we would still have rare earths. We'd have, I've talked as a World War II amateur historian. I've talked many times about how the U.S. could have been blockaded on both seas, and we would have had everything we needed to build all those weapon systems here in the U.S. In terms of all the rare earths. I think we were probably, along with the Soviet Union, we were the dominant rare earth, military superpower of World War II. The liberals and all the environmental extremists have kind of bottled all those up. I live in the state of Utah, and we have rare earth mines that have been closed for years. We just need to reopen those, and unfortunately, it's going to take many years to do that. And we don't have the luxury of knowing that we'll have a Trump or Vance as president, past the next presidential election. So. It's a critical vulnerability. And as you mentioned, the sea lift capabilities. I mean, China has the largest, dual use amphibious force in the world. I think around 360 10,000 ton dual use ferries that have been converted exclusively to military use over the last 3 to 5 years, ready to invade Taiwan in a week's or less notice. So, and I wanted to mention our national defense strategy. The Department of Defense has come up with a national defense strategy under our great Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, which really focuses our national defense strategy on defense of the homeland and the hemisphere in terms of missile defense, in terms of fighting China in Latin America. Getting rid of Russia and Chinese influence here at home, perhaps overthrowing the Maduro regime in communist Venezuela and eliminating that threat, instead of fighting them half the world away, and kind of being more realistic. As it was written, of course, by Elbridge Colby, who I'm a great admirer of in terms of his strategic mind. He's been a leader in terms of countering China. But before he was nominated and approved confirmed as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, he began writing posts on X that said, we're coming to the point where if we calculate that we can't win a war against China over Taiwan realistically, then that's a war we may not want to risk. And he's definitely implementing a national security policy that is much more realistic. It's much more likely to assure U.S. national survival than, of course, the neocon policies of Secretary of State Rubio and others.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that the Xi's mindset will somehow change away from the positive impact we've had vis-a-vis the tariff operation, where it's kind of tamped down this rhetoric about going against Taiwan kinetically and everything, and his mindset may change over time. And he tried to do that while we have not had the time to increase our manufacturing, to secure the Western Hemisphere, to boot China out of the Panama Canal, and reduce Iranian and Russian and Chinese influence in this hemisphere, and they'll catch us at a point where we're not ready. That's the issue, and I completely agree with Elbridge Colby. I think that's what he's thinking about, is that concern right there, is that do we have enough time and space to rebuild ourselves and reestablish Western Hemisphere security strong enough to first deter China, and then if they decide to do something, to be able to defeat them if we need to. And we are far from being able to do that right now, but there are processes underway to try to increase those, all not as fast as I would like them to be, but there are. On this Venezuela, I call it boat plinking, but it's a strategy to interdict the supply chain and the supply lines for especially the fentanyl drugs, which kill almost 100,000 Americans a year for a long, long time. We could have probably saved 2 million lives if some U.S. Southcom commander had the cojones to step up and say, Mr. President, we need to interdict this kinetically and put a full military operation campaign together on it, both in the Gulf of America, the Caribbean, and on the Western side in the Eastern Pacific, which we've now transferred over to. Do you see that expanding to any ground targets? And I've long advocated that we should be using our special operations forces to strike ground targets of the cartel terrorist organizations, no matter where they're at. But I'm not sure we'll ever see that happen.
Yeah, I think that's likely. I think the cartel operations that are Chinese-backed, of course, are occurring mainly in Mexico and northern Mexico near our border. And as you mentioned, at least 75,000 young Americans have been killed by fentanyl every year for the last 3 or 4 years. So that's hundreds of thousands, at least 300,000, I think, that have been killed by Chinese supplied fentanyl through the cartels. They provide the precursor chemicals at wholesale costs to sponsor that, and it's their official policy essentially to kill us off, at a low rate, as one of their, unconventional warfare capabilities and measures. But I think Trump does have plans. He's denied it, of course, but he stated just last week that Maduro's, or actually early this week, I think that Maduro's days were numbered. He said he didn't think that we'd invade Venezuela, but the very fact that he said Maduro's days are numbers indicate that his plan for regime change in Venezuela, which he openly talked about in the summer of 2017 as one of his top priorities, is likely to be operationalized with military action. Of course, we know there's carrier strike groups that will be arriving shortly in the next couple of weeks in the Caribbean. That's being the Gerald Ford, our premier aircraft carrier, largest and most powerful aircraft carrier, most advanced, will be arriving there. There's already an amphibious assault ship. I don't know if it's a Lightning carrier, but it's an amphib. We have up to 10,000 Marines, I think, that are massing there. We have Patriot missile batteries and restored military bases in Puerto Rico to support the attacks and defend against enemy strikes. But Russia, they've had some large military transports that have been landing, bringing in likely Russian mercenaries, military advisors, perhaps Spetsnaz, special forces troops. Anti-ship missiles. I don't have any evidence that they've sent more anti-ship missiles, but we know that they have hypersonic Mach 3, not hypersonic, supersonic Mach 3 anti-ship missiles that could hit carrier strike groups or amphibious vessels that could cause a lot of U.S. casualties. We know they have at least 20 of those from their Su-30s, their flanker fighter bombers. But that is something I think that Trump should focus on. I think he should focus on overthrowing the Venezuelan communist regime. But I've advocated that he do that through a land invasion through Guyana, which has been neighbors Venezuela on its eastern flank, and has been threatened with invasion by communist Venezuela. So I think that would be a better way, less risky way than an amphibious invasion.
Yeah, I think so. And we don't really need to use U.S. troops to do that. The Guyanans, we could assist them in that. But more importantly, I think pressuring Maduro to just step down and let the legitimate elected officials take control again and reverse this communism in that country would be the best way to go. Well, David, thank you very much. We appreciate your effort and hope to have you on again soon as the situations develop all around the world. And tomorrow's Truth Thursday, we'll be talking to a U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel that has been fighting the weaponization of government against him for 15 years. I'll see you then.